Hi, I'm Jim Huling, and I want to welcome you to this episode of Execution Insights, the podcast. Now, remember that this podcast is a place where we as leaders can step away from all the noise and all the urgent priorities, and we can together go deeper into what truly makes a leader great, so that the things that we build will truly last. I hope that sounds like an exciting adventure. Let's get started. Hi, I'm Jim Huling, and I am so excited to welcome you to this very first episode of the podcast, Execution Insights. You know, there are so many places in the world that you can go to learn about leadership, and there are books and courses and articles. And frankly, they're all packed with strategies and tactics and frameworks. And gosh, I just love those resources. I tap them all the time. But here's the truth. Most of them focus on what I like to call the outer life of a leader. You know what I mean? The outer life is about the numbers you hit, or the projects you deliver, or the speed of execution. And those are all really important things. They're all visible and they're all measurable, and they all matter. But you know, the longer I've been in leadership, the more I've realized what sustains you, what carries you through the hardest moments, and honestly, what leaves a legacy long after we're gone isn't the outer life. It's the inner life. That's the part that doesn't show up on a dashboard, but it shows up in how people feel when they're with you. It shows up in whether your team feels safe around you, or inspired, or trusted. And it shows up in those moments when no one else sees. You know what I mean? When you're making a tough decision, or facing uncertainty, or even privately trying to summon the courage you're not really sure you have. Well, that's what this podcast is all about. The inner life of a leader. Well, let me take you back to a time when I was serving as CIO for a large company. One of the practices I developed back then was writing handwritten notes to members of my team. And I know lots of people do this practice, and it's probably valuable everywhere you go. And in my case, it was nothing fancy. It was just a short note of encouragement or appreciation, or even sometimes in belief. And I would just leave it on their desk or drop it in the mail, or sometimes I would send it to their home as a special delivery item. And at the time, I didn't think of it as anything extraordinary. It was just a way of saying, hey, I see you, and I see how hard you're working, and you matter. I must have written dozens, if not hundreds, of these notes. Well, fast forward 18 years. I'm now a keynote speaker traveling the world, delivering the message of the 4 disciplines of execution. And as I often was, I'm in a hotel restaurant eating breakfast before a big presentation. And out of the corner of my eye, I noticed someone walking toward me with a look like, I know you, I'm coming toward you, you know? And she comes up and smiles and says, hi, Jim, you probably don't remember me. Now, no truer words could have been spoken. I didn't have a clue who she was, but she seemed very friendly and nice. And I felt like it was going to be a reunion of some kind. And then she tells me that she was once a junior project manager on a team in IT where I had been the CIO. And it was almost 2 decades earlier. So I understood, kind of why I didn't remember her. But then she said this. She said, I still have the note you wrote to me. Now, my friends, this is 18 years later. And what she did next, I was completely unprepared for, because she reached in her purse and drew out this piece of paper, that was worn and ragged, had coffee cup stains on it, And she held it up proudly and said, "This is that note. I've carried it with me for 18 years." Think about that for a moment. A note so commonplace, so ordinary, so inconsequential that I don't really remember writing that specific one, turns into something so important that it's treasured, that it's carried with her through many jobs, through many opportunities, through many seasons and years of her life. You see, that message stayed with her. Not because it was a brilliant strategy on my part. It actually wasn't, right? It stayed with her because it spoke to something deeper, something that was inside her. And that's the inner life of leadership at work. So if you're ever wondering if the things we do make a difference, if it really matters, imagine the things you might do today or tomorrow or this week becoming something so treasured that they would stand the test of time across decades. That's what leadership is all about. Now, this podcast references the inner life of a leader. And you might be saying, well, gosh, Jim, what is this inner life you're talking about? So I want to illustrate it for you today by sharing 3 dimensions of this inner life that I've leaned on again and again in my life. And then I want to promise you, in the episodes to come, we will, of course, be talking about strategy and execution and vision and purpose and, achievement, all the things that go into being a leader. But throughout it all, a thread that will run through is how the inner life of a leader drives those outer results. But for today, let's keep it simple. 3 specific illustrations I want to give you about how the recognition and the development of this inner life has been a crucial part of my own journey, and certainly for all the executives and leaders that I've been coaching for the last 2 decades. So, number 1, it's about faith. Now, I don't mean faith in a religious sense. Whatever your particular system of belief is in that regard, I hope you have it. I hope you treasure it. And I hope it guides you through every single day and every decision. But I don't mean religious faith. I mean faith in the vision that calls you forward. Faith in the people that you lead, even when maybe they haven't yet proven themselves. Faith in the unseen future that you're working toward. Because here's the truth. Leadership always requires a step into the unknown. You'll never have all the data, right? The path won't always be clear. You might even say, Jim, when has it ever been clear? And in those moments, your faith, in other words, what you choose to trust, is what will carry you through. So the first place I lean in this inner life of a leader is on my faith. Second, I think the inner life of a leader is really about, at its core, humility. Now I know we love messages about courage and boldness and strength and resilience. Those are the podcasts I listen to. Those are the things I enjoy hearing, and they never fail to get me pumped up in a really good way. I hope the same is true for you. But because of those places of emphasis, we forget about how powerful humility is and really worthy of standing alongside all those other attributes. I mean, I think humility is really the most misunderstood leadership characteristic that there is. You might say there are some that will compete with it, but we would certainly agree. Humility looks like weakness to some people, and those who practice it know it's one of the greatest strengths, right? So humility doesn't mean being soft. It doesn't mean being weak. It doesn't even mean downplaying yourself. Real humility is strength. It's the kind of strength that says to your team, hey guys, this isn't about me. It's about you. It's about this team. It's about the mission we're on to complete things for this year. And I have to tell you, in 40 years of leadership, the leaders I've admired most weren't the loudest. In fact, almost never. They were the ones who gave everyone else room to shine. I once heard a leader described as a person who took up all the oxygen in the room and everybody else was suffocating. I still to this day think that's one of the most vividly correct illustrations I've ever heard. But the leaders I'm talking about, they didn't need the credit. They weren't driven by their ego. It was their humility that made them powerful because it enabled people to trust them. So anytime someone wants to downplay humility in your lexicon of leadership characteristics, I hope you'll step up a word and boldly say, humility may be the strongest of all those attributes in terms of what's required. And third, the thing I lean on in the inner life is about presence. You know, in a distracted world, presence is really a superpower. When you give someone your full attention, I promise you this, it changes the energy of that interaction. Think about it like this. When was the last time you were with someone who really listened to you? And I mean, really listen. No phone, no multitasking, no rushing. I have a friend who calls this full body listening. I love that phrase. Every part of me is engaged. Eye contact, body posture, energy, focus, no distraction. When was the last time that happened? Well, I hope you aren't sitting there saying never. I hope you're remembering how powerful it was to be seen and heard and understood at that level in that way by the person you looked to as your leader. Now, if you hold that image in your mind, imagine being able to give that gift to your team every day. Imagine the impact if people walked away from every conversation with you feeling like they had really been seen and valued and heard, and maybe most importantly, understood. These three things I lean into almost every day of my life: faith, humility, and presence. And I want to emphasize to you that they aren't just nice words. I'm not just trying to find something entertaining to talk about on a podcast. I hope you can feel the energy I have right now trying to share them with you in the sense of how powerful a foundation of inner life they can be and how that foundation can sustain you as a leader. So let me pause here and ask you a few questions. You can answer them for yourself, or by the way, you're welcome to reply to this podcast and send me your thoughts. I'd love to read them. I'd love to start a conversation with you on these ideas. But first, when the pressure mounts, and I don't know when it doesn't as a leader, what are the practices that keep your inner life strong? And maybe the hardest question of all, what would people say is the lasting impact of being led by you? You know, one day, everything you and I have ever done is going to fade away. Everybody will forget who we were and why we mattered and what we were able to achieve. Those things will be gone. But what will stay with the people we lead, perhaps forever, is how we made them feel. And I know these 3 points are not easy questions, but they're worth wrestling with, because the answers shape the leader you're becoming every single day. So here's where we'll go from here. In the episodes ahead, we'll go deeper into each of these dimensions: faith, humility, presence, and about a dozen more. We'll talk about courage and empathy and trust. And together we'll share stories of leaders who got it right and the lessons that we were able to learn from those who didn't. And along the way, I'll keep asking questions that I hope will stay with you long after the episode ends. I've heard it said that the best podcasts are not valued for what you hear. They're valued for what you think about when it's over. And that's what I want us to do together, because that's the real work of leadership. Not just managing the outer life of results. We have to do that, and we know that, and most of us might feel we've reached a level of mastery on that. But cultivating the inner life of a leader that makes those results matter, that's the work of a lifetime. So I hope you've enjoyed this podcast today. I'm Jim Huling, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. And by the way, if you know someone who would benefit from this message, please take a moment, share the link with them, and encourage them to subscribe as well. I'm Jim Huling. This is Execution Insights, the podcast, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks so much for joining us today on this episode of Execution Insights, the podcast. And by the way, if you know someone who might be encouraged or helped by this message, don't forget to share the link with them and invite them to join us as well. I'm Jim Huling, and I'll see you in the next episode of Execution Insights, the podcast.